Hello, and welcome to another Clark University Major Spotlight. I'm your host, Jared Gibson Faber, and today I'm joined by two very special guests that know all about studying history at Clark. I'm pleased to introduce to you Professor Nina Kushner and a current student, Ben Bergeron. Would you two each take a moment to introduce yourselves and let our audience know a little bit more about what you do at Clark? Professor Kushner, would you want to start?
Hi, my name is Nina Kushner. I'm a professor of history at Clark and currently chair of the history department. I study women, gender, sexuality in the 18th century, and I teach courses on Western Europe and women, gender, and sexuality across time. And welcome to our podcast.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ben Bergeron. I'm a fifth-year student here at Clark University. Currently, my focus is on U.S.-South African relations, particularly in the latter portion of the 20th century, with a focus on the more social aspects, so music, art, entertainment, things like that, so things that aren't necessarily covered in some of the larger stuff. I like that focus. It's a really interesting, really engaging stuff.
No, that's awesome. That's great. A little more personal than just wars and dates and things like that, which I think a lot of people initially associate with history or the study of history. So
right.
I'm glad you got that perspective with you. So awesome. Today we're just going to be talking about the major, kind of breaking it down for perspective and students. So I like to start with the basics. So Professor Kushner, would you mind talking a little bit about the major, sort of in a broad sense, talk about maybe classes that students can expect to take, maybe any sort of trajectories that students go through during the history major, and maybe tailor to like a first year perspective?
Sure.
Kind of.
So I should just start by saying that in order to graduate from Clark, you need 32 courses. The history major is like most majors, it's 10 courses in history and then 2 outside courses. So that's 12. So when you think about what to major in, you should realize you can probably major in more than one thing if you want to without a lot of trouble. So our major, if you're a first year, one thing you might consider is taking an FYI in history, and we offer quite a few. I'm teaching one in the fall on the witch craze, which is on, all this hunting of witches and women in the early modern period in Europe. There's another being offered on African American social and political movements by Professor Power Green. We have quite a few on Nazi Germany that'll be offered another time. So that's a good way to get interested and introduced to history. You can also take one of our surveys. We offer quite a few every fall. I think in the fall we have one on the Holocaust. We have one on modern Europe. I probably should have checked the schedule before we started. But we have a few, and that's a way to be sort of introduced to the sort of introductory level of history study at Clark, meet faculty, and start with skill acquisition. So in a survey, you would learn basically how to write persuasively, right? It's an important skill that you'll take with you. How to read critically, another important skill that you'll take with you no matter what you major in. And so that's sort of the first year experience. We can talk about what happens after that later.
Yeah, for sure. I would love to get kind of Ben's views on this, though. As a student who studied history at Clark, can you maybe just talk really quickly about how you maybe got into the major? Was it something you came in knowing you wanted to study? Was it something you picked up while you were here? How did you kind of make that transition?
Yeah, so actually for me, from the conversations I've had with, other people in the major and some of my friends here at Clark, I actually came into Clark, fairly certain that I wanted to do history, which I know isn't common, and people can change their majors as much as they want. For me, I knew what I wanted, and it was history. I started, my FYI wasn't or FYE, whichever, was not a history-oriented class, but we were actually able to write historical research papers if we wanted. So already right at the beginning, there was a lot of flexibility in my classes in order to cater it to, our own interests. So it's just, basically your early classes are going to be, like Professor Kushner said, very survey, but it's a great way to get into history, because what is pretty difficult is jumping into that higher level stuff without getting those basics. Like any discipline, you need to develop tools. With history, those tools aren't as concrete as, like a physics major or something that's a little more quantitative. We're looking at qualitative work. So a lot of those survey classes, you just gotta, start, working your brain in the way that historians work. And all of the professors are really great at kind of getting you started in that process. You're going to be alongside some higher level students, but the expectations for you are going to be that you are a first year student and they work with you, and it's very flexible.
No, that's awesome. And I'm glad that kind of those first year, those early introductory level courses focused on skill building and skill acquisition, because I think that's a great segue into talking about what a history major is worth at Clark. So some of the skills you can pick up that are maybe transferable across disciplines, across career paths. So I know at Clark we have a variety of ways to really take agency over the things that students are doing in the classroom. Professor Kushner, could you talk maybe a little bit about research opportunities or classes that students take to be really engaged in history, maybe a little bit above that introductory level or even on it, if those.
Sure, yeah. I want to return to something that Ben said, which is sort of about access. So all professors, first of all, we know who you are and we care and we give you homework and we read it and we give you feedback and sometimes we make you redo it in order to help you develop those sort of essential skills that, at least in these surveys, you can take with you anywhere. But also are critical, as Ben said, to developing yourself as an historian. But we have office hours, all of us, a lot of them, which are just time for you to come by if you want and talk about what you're learning, what you're reading, or anything that you like. They're open, so you have complete access to your professors. Okay, well, as far as research, in the second year of the major, we ask you to take our one methods course, which is called Writing History. Writing history teaches you what history is and how to actually write it. And in that, you do your first big sort of research project. Then after that, you have seminars, and every seminar will ask you to do a research project. This culminates later in either a capstone or an honors thesis in your senior year, which we can talk about later. But basically from your sophomore year on, there are all these opportunities for you to explore topics that interest you as you're developing your skills to do so. I mean, I know for people who haven't studied history, it seems like, okay, you can just look up a bunch of stuff and you're writing history. No, it's an actual discipline. Like it takes historians, 5, 7, sometimes 10 years in graduate school. I know that's crazy. Is that crazy? That's really crazy. To get a PhD to do this. So we do sequence it, but the opportunities come very early. And then we ask you to pursue your interests.
Yeah, and I think you see that a lot at Clark, and not just in history either, just across the board, that students have, some real awesome opportunities early on to just be really engaged in what they're doing. So it's nice to hear that history is no different in terms of that. So Ben, are you back?
Yeah.
Awesome, great. So Professor Kushner was talking a little bit about just different opportunities that students have once they're, just above that introductory level to really take agency over the things they're doing. So you mentioned that you're interested in music and art and maybe some more of the social aspects of life. Is that something you picked up in these classes, or was that an interest you brought with you that you were able to kind of cultivate in these spaces?
So that was definitely something that, as I took more classes here at Clark, I started to realize that, that is what I was interested in. I did find myself in high school, dozing off a little bit now and then in some of those like kind of big macro classes about, names, dates, and it all kind of like hits you like a wave. Something that I found that I really clung to in a lot of these history classes was the ability to focus on the social aspects, the cultural aspects of life, the downtime that a lot of the time you may not see in a textbook unless it's specifically catered to that type of work. Something that really came out to me was in my writing history class, which is kind of one of the first classes that you really get that creativity and agency as a historian to do your own work. You develop sort of a research proposal. I focused mine on kind of the civil rights movement, particularly Max Roach and Abby Lincoln's Freedom Now suite. So basically right from, sophomore year, you are given that freedom and that independence to do the work that you want. And my work was definitely more social, cultural, but people in that exact same class were working those political histories or the military histories. So it really is a nice flexible class that I learned a lot from. One, from my own independent research, but two, the tools that I learned from doing that with a much smaller class size allowed us to really kind of have those dialogues and those kind of discussions to kind of flex those muscles per se, to really get that, the blood flowing and get that information going.
Yeah, totally. No, it's great. Doing personal research, you pick up so many skills that I think aren't advertised when you're talking about Clark in a liberal arts institution. Like, yeah, there are definitely writing skills and analytical skills, but like nobody thinks about a really intense attention to detail that I think historical research has students and people do, more so than maybe some other disciplines. And I think that serves students well for sure.
Oh yeah.
I should add something. So Ben is my advisee, and so another part of this is sort of not visible, that we had so many conversations between when you declared your major and when you started your honors thesis about the ways in which your interests could combine, like music, yep, social history, and you figured out how to do that. But there's a lot of like, advisors, instructors, hallway conversations, office hour conversations with students thinking, well, it seems like you're interested in this, and have you thought about this? And the student will say, I was really thinking about this. And then you sort of, I'm moving my hands like a professor, but you can't see. And sort of combining those things. Then just back to one other thing you said, Jared, about transferable skills. Historians actually, history majors do really well as when they graduate. They get jobs, and most of them are not in history. So a large number do go into education, but if you look at the various sort of pie charts that you see on where do our majors go, they go all over the place. And part of the reason is because they have these transferable skills. They can manage qualitative data. They can write well. They can read really well. They can write persuasively. They can manage projects on their own. And so these are sort of soft skills that aren't really soft skills. I mean, so they're important, and they are developed sequentially through the major by doing these projects. It's a history instruction in the beginning is sort of big, and then it goes down to a sort of an apprenticeship. It's you and your instructor working on a paper, a proposal, or whatever it might be, with the help of conversation of your peers in the class. So I think it's a really neat environment in which to sort of grow as a thinker.
No, that's awesome. And I love that you mentioned hallway conversations and just those little pieces that I think make coming to Clark and like being in the residential space and living and learning, as a Clark is just so exciting and great. And so I'm so bummed out we can't get students to campus these days. But no, thank you for that information for sure. But let's turn our gears, or turn our cars, or the conversation. Let's turn the conversation, and let's talk a little about kind of the end. So we've mentioned thesis, honor thesis, outcomes, transferable skills. So I think I'd love to learn a little bit about just the capstone experience in general. So maybe what that looks like both from an instructor's point of view and a student's point of view.
Okay, so I'll be brief because I think Ben can speak to this much better than I can. So we have students are required to do a capstone, which can be in a number of forms. It can be just a big paper that's done out of a seminar. It can be an independent study that's done with a professor. It can be a public history project where you engage with the community in some way and have some sort of presentation. Or for students who are really driven and have done well, it can be a year-long project, which is an honors thesis, and you graduate with honors. And I think I'll pass the baton to Ben, who did one. I'm sorry, the honors thesis is also a requirement for entry into our fifth-year program, our MA in history.
Yeah, I mean, the honors thesis is, when you haven't gotten started yet, there's a lot of concern about the amount of work that it entails. Something that I was very anxious about, but very quickly as I got started, realized that, like anything, if you treat it like a job, or if you're treating it like a long-term project, then it's not any harder than any of the other work you're going to do. Obviously, with the fact that you've been building these tools for, 2, 3, 4 years, depending on when you started to really focus on history. The honors thesis is a really great way to flex those independent research muscles that you've been building and those tools that you've been working on, particularly, with getting into those archives. There's not a whole lot of opportunity to really kind of dig in and zoom in your research to get into those archives. The honors thesis really provides you that opportunity by basically it takes up a certain amount of credits, which allows you to focus some of your time on these independent works. I was able to get some funding to go down to DC and do some research at Howard University in the archives down there. And that was an amazing opportunity. I got to know some archivists. I got to speak with a lot of people down there. Recently, I've been in contact with the historian that lives in South Africa, and we're emailing each other. And basically just you get what you put into it. And if you're willing to really put in that work and put in the effort, then like it's your research, your work will show it. And it feels great to just get that work and get that research and just kind of put your hands on some documents. As a historian, it's a really cool thing to look at these documents firsthand.
Do you want to explain what your thesis was on?
Yeah, so my thesis last year was it was on the musicians' influence on the anti-apartheid movement. So my thesis this year is a continuation of that. It's a little broader and looks a little more at South African, the people who are working on the ground in South Africa. Last year, I was looking at kind of the US and international awareness raising. So I was looking at festivals, concerts. I was looking at fundraising events, albums, basically anything that I could get my hands on that had any apartheid relevance. I found ways to make it work. I know obviously there are a lot of different tracks. And another great thing about the honors thesis is that you work closely with anyone else in the honors program. So I worked with a close friend of mine and a bunch of other close friends that I've been, going through this major with for so long. That allows us to, bounce ideas off of each other and also keeps that feeling of isolation kind of at bay, because you're always with people. You can always kind of be like, hey, I'm really stressed. I don't really know what to do next. You have a crew of your own colleagues, but also Professor Kushner was our advisor through that, and she helped us as well. So it's independent. You have a lot of freedom, but you also have that support network that allows you to, fall back on it. If things get rough or if you really need some help, you have people around you that can help you.
That's awesome. That's great. And I know a lot of students who are looking at Clark really value community and active, engaged community. So it's nice to hear even in these, intense, high stakes honors thesis experiences, you're still kind of with your classmates and you're still employing the same kind of community values that you've employed for the last 3 years. So I think that's a great note to end on. I do like to get a little mushy here at the end though. So really quick, if I could just have each one of you give one piece of advice for incoming students, future Clarkies, if you will. Anything.
Oh, yeah, I got one. Okay, so been at this for a while. The first is pursue your interests. Don't worry day 1, day 50, day 120, what you're going to major in and whether this is going to lead to a job. Just the thing is, the history that you had in high school, maybe it was taught by the coach, history at Clark is going to be so different. I mean, I do history of sexuality. How is that not interesting, right? So I'd say whatever the case, whatever the field, just pursue your interests. Take courses that you think will open up your worldview and make you understand things differently. And your advisors will help you figure it out from there. But don't worry day 1. Just pursue your interests.
Awesome. Ben?
Yeah, I mean, kind of on that same note, I would definitely say that like my suggestion would be similar to Professor Kushner as, follow your interests. I think for myself, I felt that I needed to find an interest that fit within kind of this idea that I had of a historian. And as Professor Kushner being my advisor, she gave me a lot of suggestions, and she was always like, Ben, you're a musician. I know that you love music, so why don't you pursue that? Why don't you try to bring that into your work? And I was kind of like, oh, you know what? Why am I not doing that? And it really helped me, like, you know, they say if you love what you work, you don't work a day in your life. Yeah, you know, it comes and goes there, but I do definitely think that if you're pursuing those interests, that passion is just gonna give you way more, just way more power to do what you want to do, and you're just gonna be more interested in it.
Awesome. That's great. Do what you like, and
Yeah.
you'll be successful. I like that. So thank you both so much for talking about the history major. You know, we talked about a lot of things today, about the basics, about taking agency over what you're doing, about writing your capstone, about all sorts of stuff. So I really appreciate the time you two spent with me today. And thank you.
Thank you.